All right. Good morning and happy Easter. I trust you had a wonderful Easter celebration celebrating Christ this past weekend. So moving forward with our sessions, today we'll be looking at content design, mastering the content. But before that, let me just look at the things that we have already looked at so far in this class. So we've been trying to define what is teaching, what is learning. We have looked at different maxims for learning. So we've been looking at a number of principles, a number of theories, principles related to teaching. And then we have started looking at the practice of it. So in terms of the theories and the principles, we've defined understanding teaching, learning, the maxims, who are the adults, how do the adults learn, what are the different learning styles, what is a philosophy of education, what components does it have, what are the different theories of learning. Broadly, we've looked at some of them. How do humans learn? How does the brain work? We looked at factors underpinning effective learning, and moving with that, we moved into the development of a lesson plan. What is a lesson plan? What are the different components of a lesson plan? What does it have? And as part of it, we looked at it has a learning outcomes. It has defining the learning outcomes, and we looked at what learning outcomes have. And the last session was, it had to do with instructional strategies, methodologies we'll use. And then we've talked about how do you facilitate learning. And today, as part of your lesson plan, of course, your lesson plan has the learning outcomes in it, and then it has the information you give. But if you remember, under develop, we have two things. You give the information, but not only the information, but you also reinforce the information. You get them to do something with it. If you remember, we looked at the different learning styles based on McCarthy's. Why do I need to know? What do I need to know? These are the imaginative learnings. And then the factual learners, what do I need to learn? And then the common sense was, how does this work? And then the dynamic ones, what can I do with it outside? And that follows the natural learning cycle. So we've seen you have the learning outcomes, you grab the attention of your students, and then you give them the information. That's the content. And that's what we'll be talking about in a minute. Content mastery. What content do you give? How do you give it? How can you become confident about the content you give? So mastery of the content. And then reinforcing whatever they are learning. Now, through all of this, in the delivery of the content, in helping the students to reinforce whatever they're learning, of course, you have the instructional strategies, the different methods of teaching you'll be using, okay? And we've looked at that one. And and facilitating effective learning is obviously what we have seen. So moving forward, with all of those things, they will be a part of your lesson plan, okay? So now, coming to the mastery of the content, I would like us to look at this design, the design process. When you design, basically this is a design process for a curriculum. When you develop a curriculum, these are the steps that will be followed. As you can see here, curriculum design, it begins with understanding who your audience is, who are your learners. So you begin with knowing what you want to teach, knowing who your students are, what is it that the students will probably need to know? What kind of knowledge is lacking? So you begin by looking at the needs of the students. You do an assessment a need assessment. And once you assess the need, what kind of need exists there? Okay, that's where you begin. You begin at understanding who your students are, their profile. Okay, you define their profile, you understand who your students are, and based on your understanding of who your students are, then you come up with your learning outcomes. Okay, we've talked about learning outcomes. What is a learning outcome? How do you write a learning outcome? What's the value of learning outcomes? We've talked about it. So where does the learning outcome come from? It comes from your understanding of the needs of your students. It can't be created in the vacuum. It has to be focused on the needs of the students, understanding the needs of the students. And your outcome will be one that seeks to achieve the development of a certain competence in the students based on the needs that they have. Okay, so once you have the learning outcomes, then you decide what do they need to know. Okay, this is what competence I want my students to develop. In order to do that, what content do they need? What information shall I give them? How should I teach them? Okay, so it's content, and then how should I teach them? How should I give that content to them such that the learning outcomes will be achieved? And finally, you will ask, okay, how do I know? That's the evaluation. How do I know my methods and the content have helped me to achieve my learning outcomes? So in developing your curriculum, you have these different ones. You look at the students, you assess the needs of the students, you come up with your learning outcomes, you decide on content, and you decide how you want to deliver it, and then you decide on how do I know? And that will be a part of it. But this is not only with curriculum development, and I'm not talking about curriculum development, but this is also the same procedure you'll be using in lesson planning, in planning your lesson. You look at your students, you see the needs, you come up with your learning outcomes. Once you have your learning outcomes, then you will ask yourself, okay, how do I teach it? Okay, now how do I grab my students' attention? You remember that one? The readiness, how do I grab the students' attention? Okay, then what content should I give them? What content should I give them? How should I give it to them? How should I reinforce that knowledge for them? And that takes you to the point of the methodology, instructional strategies. So I have the curriculum, I have the learning outcomes that I want to achieve. Okay, to achieve this one, what content shall I give them? And how shall I teach it? How shall I teach it? How shall I give them the information? How should I reinforce the information for them? Okay, that would be the methodology. And you can ask the question, how do I know that they have actually achieved it? What should I ask them to do to show me that they have achieved it? Now, all of these things are put together in your lesson plan. And your lesson plan can have something like this. It could have something similar to what we've already talked about in class. So you can design it in any way as long as you have the different components that's necessary for it that we talked. So it begins with your learning outcome. You have to have clear learning outcomes. And once you have your learning outcomes, what you want to do is, okay, this is the outcome, and you know that your students are not always ready to listen to the things that you have. You ask yourself, how do I get them ready? How do I grab their attention? That will be your begin, okay? And then develop has two components, if you remember. We said that's the information and also the reinforcement, okay? Two parts to it. How do I give them the information? We said there's so much information, you chunk them. We use chunking in short bits. You give it to them. You should give them a short bit and you get them to do something, actively engaged in it. Making sense, learning by doing, this is the reinforcement. You get them to do something about it. You show them, you get them to do something, that's where they practice it. And then finally, of course, it is the carry over. This is they will take it out. What do they do with it? As part of the conclusion. What do you want them to do with it outside? Now, how do you want them to demonstrate it for you? And that will be your way of evaluating. So evaluation part, this is for you to see how your lesson has been going on. But all the things that you have planned your lesson comes into this lesson planning. Okay, where does it start? It starts with knowing the needs of your students, and based on the needs of the students, you come up with your learning outcomes. And once you have your learning outcomes, you ask yourself, what content shall I give them to achieve that? How should I teach it to them so that the learning outcomes will be achieved? And the evaluation, how do I know my students have mastered this? So that's the process we follow. Now, we've looked at learning outcomes. We've looked at instructional strategies, which you will use throughout your whole lesson. And then now I would like us to move forward and look at mastery of the content. And I'll try to go quick here. So 3 questions to consider. How well can I synthesize my content area? That's me. Can I synthesize the content area that I have? Can I distinguish between essential and excessive questions for the level that I am teaching? Can I decide on what's essential and what is excessive information? Can I trace how any given detail relates back to the whole? The details should be related to the overall, the big idea that we are trying to achieve. So the idea of synthesis, going in details. In thinking of synthesis, this requires knowing all the data and being able to consolidate the data into most essential things that you want to say. So synthesis has the idea of knowing everything. I need to know the things so that I will be able to consolidate it. If I don't know things, then I won't be able to consolidate ideas. So it requires knowing all the data and being able to consolidate the data into most essential things to say. It is, for example, it is Easter, like now. And the Ethiopian television, they give you 15 seconds and they ask you, give the message of the gospel within this 15 seconds. Will you have a message? If ETV gives you 15 seconds, not half an hour, not 1 hour, but they give you only 15 seconds and they tell you, this is an opportunity for you, share the gospel, 15 seconds. Will you have a message? You will, right? You just have to know what is the gospel and bring it to short to fit into 15 seconds. So time doesn't matter if you know exactly what you want to communicate. This process requires the high order of thinking where you evaluate and synthesize on Bloom's taxonomy. So to be able to look at all the information about the gospel and to be able to say, okay, which one is most important, and that's evaluation, and then you synthesize the whole thing into a 15 seconds. That's a high level of learning, and that's a capacity. But then that's it. When you know what content you have to deliver, and when you know what your outcome, what your goal is, then you'll be able to put it into that 15 seconds. Sorting essential from excessive information. We are in a time when there is a data overload necessary to sort the information, therefore it's important. You go into the internet, you have millions of things on any subject. There's so much there. So there is an information overload. This head can be overloaded. And so if you want to just pour all that information, you'll be overloading your students. So there is so much information, but not all the information is equally important. So you need to be able to decide which one is important and which one is not important. That means which one is essential, which one is excessive. Think through the material and distinguish between the nice to know and the essential to know. Teaching from the deep of the forest to the students, by approaching the forest. So you are deep into the forest, but then what you do is, the deeper you go into it, you can easily be lost in it, but you need to be able to pull yourself out and see, okay, this is all the information, which ones are most essential for my students, and be able to distinguish, identify, and decide which one is essential and which ones would be good to know. And there is so much information out there that's good to know, but not all of them are necessarily essential. Staying oriented, being able to move back and forth between the big picture and the details. This demonstrates content mastery. Okay, so every time you have a certain detail, go back to the big picture, connect it to the big picture, okay, to make sure that the details don't get lost and become overburdened. But make sure that every detail that we're giving is connected to the big picture. So it is moving back and forth between the big picture and the details. And that's why it's important to do certain revision at different times. It helps us to connect the details that we're giving with the big picture that we are trying to achieve. The educational system is designed such that time is constant. You have 45 minutes, and competence is variable. Okay, 45 minutes, the competence that the students, the master, what they will be mastering will be the one that will be variable. Okay, you give me 45 minutes, their mastery will be this much. You give me 2 hours, mastery will be this much, okay? So mastery, the competence will be variable, but the time is fixed. Now the idea is students may be in a course and they may complete the course within the set time, but they may not have developed the competence. So a student, students might be in a classroom for a whole semester, but then how much are they going to be gaining from the course at the end of the course? Maybe different. Anyways, the point is knowing clearly what competence do I want my students to achieve. It's important for us to know what is it that we want to achieve. And when we know exactly what we want our students to achieve, to master, then the time doesn't really matter, okay? Within a short time, you can get your students to achieve the competence you want them to have. It may not be to the same extent, but you can do it. If you want people to know the gospel, you can explain it to them in an hour, but you can also do it in 15 seconds, okay? You can do it. But the point is knowing exactly what is it that you want the students to master. And that requires you and me mastering the content, knowing the content that we are teaching. So they say, as a teacher, you can change that. You can change that where time is fixed, but the competence is the one that is variable. You can change that to the point where competence is fixed, but time is variable. You may have 15 seconds, you may have 1 hour, you will achieve your competence there. So competence becomes fixed, but then time could be variable. So in order to do this, determine what you think a master of your content should know. What should my students know? If I say they have mastered it, what is it that they should know? Use that as a goal for yourself. That makes time to be variable. The best teachers are not those who mastered the content, but those who are mastering the content. Okay. Why are we saying this? Because content always changes. We can't have mastered and say, look, we've done it, we've finished. No, because the content today and the content tomorrow is different. So we will be always mastering it. So a good teacher is a person who continues to learn, who continues to master knowledge. Mastery through teaching, and I like this because I do know teaching increases learning. I know that every time I teach something, I'm learning. Every time you teach, you learn. So the best way for you to learn is to keep teaching. As you give, okay, as you receive and give, you grow. Okay, you continue to be fresh. Mastery of content and confidence develop with repetition of teaching content. As you teach a certain content repeatedly, you begin to master it, you begin to develop confidence in it as well. Consider your teaching as a continuation of your learning curve toward mastery of your content. That's the idea. As you continue to teach, you continue to be mastering it. So it is your learning curve. Finally, avoid the clutter that confuses students. More is not necessarily better. In fact, they say less is more. So don't feel like if I give them lots of information, that's how they learn. No, more does not necessarily mean anything, because if you've given them more, but if they don't get anything, then that's useless. But if you give them less, and if they can do something big with it, then that's good. All right, here it is. We're done with this one. We'll see you in a bit.